Om Tava Kathamratam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Sharavana Mangalam Shrimatatam Bhuvigananti Bhurirajana. Your words are like nectar, bring life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome everyone to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We're on the chapter, The Master with the Brahmo Devotees. Some of these chapters take place over several days. This one has many different entries. So we're on page 224, and it is Saturday, June 2nd, 1883. Sri Ramakrishna had been invited to visit the homes of the devotees Balaram, Adhar, and Ram in Calcutta. These are three of the most important householder devotees. Last week, I believe I talked about Ram, Ramchandra Datta. We've met Adhar before, Yeah. And I gave a little introduction. I wanted to say a little bit more. I find it helpful, personally, when we know who these people are. We start to feel like they're family members. And it makes a big difference in understanding why and how Sri Ramakrishna speaks to them when we understand the relationship that they had. Some of them get a little bit of a rough treatment. This Ishan especially. There's one whole chapter, Advice to Ishan, where Sri Ramakrishna just blasts him. And we think if it had been us, we would have just kind of withered away and just disappeared. But Ishan takes it it turns out that Thakur loved him so much. They were very close, and he was a wonderful soul, very, very generous. And the same thing with Adhar. We'll find that Sri Ramakrishna, that they argue with each other. That Adhar was a deputy magistrate, he was trying to get a big job, and Thakur was saying, you already have a big job, why are you trying so hard for something else? And he argues back. If you love this Naran so much, if he went for a big job, would you also scold him? And so, but we have to understand how much Thakur loved him, and what their relationship was, and also that Ishan was not destined to live very long. And Thakur knew all of these things. So this also plays into it. So I wanted to just go through a little bit. Adhar Sen. He was born in 1855. So it says, okay, so beloved householder devotee of Sri Ramakrishna. He met him first in 1883. This is already June 2nd, 1883, so he's a newcomer. His father was a well-to-do businessman, and Adhar was 29. Let's see, Adhar Janmasthan. Oh, sorry. Oh no, that's where he was born. Okay. He was very well versed in literature and other things. He wrote some books. He wrote 5 different books on Bengali poetry. This is Adhar. And the beginning, early of his days, he was a Gnostic. We hear this term very much. Maybe not exactly an atheist, but he had kind of lost his faith. He was a modern person. This was very common in those days, that those who had a modern education lost their faith a little bit, especially in Hindu temple worship and things like that. Brahmo Samaj people a little bit. So it says in the beginning that he was an atheist, a Gnostic, and then at the age of, it says 28, at the first meeting with Sri Ramakrishna, that he became very much devoted to him, and Thakur drew him near him. One day it says Thakur, he used to write a mantra on the tongue, So one day he wrote the Ishta Mantra on the tongue of Adhar. That means he initiated him. So he was one of the initiated householder devotees. We don't know for sure who exactly Thakur initiated unless somebody was there or he told people. They're curious. Say Yogan, Swami Yogananda. Thakur apparently never really initiated him in the same way because he had Holy Mother do it. And yet we consider him his disciple. So Adhar was his disciple, but we see that he had that type of initiation. And Thakur, in an ecstatic state, he touched Adhar on the chest and on the head and blessed him that way. And then gradually, there's Adhar, he went into a very high spiritual mood at that time. Thakur went to his house on many occasions, and they arranged for Kirtan there. And it says Thakur looked upon Adhar as Narayan. We find this term very often, especially with Purna, that he looked upon him as Narayan. With Swamiji, you know, one time Swamiji was saying to him, or no, I think it was Hazra. Huh? One of them said, "You're always thinking of these boys. You'll be like King Bharat, always thinking of the deer." He became a deer and everything. And so Thakur got a doubt. He was very childlike. If people said things, he would go to the Divine Mother. And so the Divine Mother said, "No, because you see Narayan in them. This is why you're so attracted to Naren and the others." And he even said to Naren one day, the moment that I won't see Narayana, I won't see God dwelling within you, I won't be able to look at your face. So he saw same way. So he looked upon Adhar in the same way that he looked upon some of his closest monastic disciples also. As Adhar was engaged in so many different things. Deputy magistrate, trying to get a big job, and other types of things. But it says practically every day, after tremendously hard work, at the end of the day, he would go to Dakshineshwar to make pranam to Sri Ramakrishna. And Thakur met Bankim Chandra at his house. And what else interesting? Okay, there's Adhar. He used to go to his government job on horseback. It seems strange. I guess you could do it just through the street in the middle of the city and everything, riding on horseback. And it says that Thakur warned him many times about this, to be careful about this. It says, but at the age of 30, so this means that while Thakur was still living, at the age of 30, one day he fell off the back of the horse and he died. And even at that time, Sri Ramakrishna came to see him and blessed him with tears in his eyes. So this is our Adhar Sen. I thought you might be interested to hear a few words about him. There are a couple of very nice books, one by Swami Chaitanananda Ji and one by Swami Prabhananda Ji, dealing with all of the householder disciples. It's very nice. Their lives are equally inspiring as the monastic disciples. They were all great souls. They were all part of this Leela, this divine play of Sri Ramakrishna. And the more we know about them, the more we appreciate the role that they had to play. So Thakur evidently had some premonition, and he warned Adhar some premonition that he wouldn't live very long. And this also helps us understand why he was telling this Adhar, don't be so involved with all of this, trying to make more money, this and that. Devote more of your time to God. Maybe he knew that he didn't have much time left. Okay, so Sri Ramakrishna had been invited to visit the homes of his devotees, Balaram, Adhar, and Ram, Balaram Bose. Now another thing, Balaram, we may wonder, if we don't know who he is and the relationship, why Thakur half the time is saying that he's a little bit cheap and stingy. He was so generous, and Thakur stayed at his house so many times. So Thakur was so close to him, he could tease him a little bit. This is Balaram's way. You cook your own food, you play your own music. But actually, Balaram was extremely generous, and Thakur appreciated him very much. And then Ram, he would scold this Ram and say, who is he, calling me an avatar and everything. But again, very, very generous and very close to Sri Ramakrishna. So these are really three of the chief, most important householder devotees, Balaram, Adhar, and Ram. Devotional music had been arranged by Adhar and Ram. This Ram was very good at arranging for Kirtan. So even in Balaram's house, some of the other homes, he would be the one who would arrange for that. There were different Kirtan parties and some well-known Kirtan singers that they would hire and bring for the occasion. The master was accompanied in the carriage by Rakal, M, and others. So now we're getting the really inner circle. Inner circle doesn't simply mean the Antaranga devotees, doesn't simply mean the monastic members, these householder members also, Balaram, Adhar, Ram, and M, and others. As they drove along, Sri Ramakrishna said to the devotees, you see, sin flies away when love of God grows in a man's heart, even as the water of the reservoir dug in a meadow dries up under the heat of the sun. Thakur didn't like people to be obsessed with this idea of sin. He used to say, those who say, I'm a sinner, ami papi, he said, they become a sinner. He said, better to recognize, yes, I did some things in the past that I shouldn't have done. I'll do my best not to do them again, and that's the end of it. Not to dwell on it too much. We start to think of ourselves that way. We need to have a positive self-image. This was Swamiji, huh? Tell yourselves you're children of the divine, the children of immortality, and feel that innermost strength. So he got that teaching from Sri Ramakrishna. And so he said, if you have love of God, then all these other tendencies, they all stem from ego if we examine them. Ego and this desire for enjoyment and this fear of criticism, so many different things cause us to do things that we recognize we shouldn't do. There's a very nice verse, one of my favorite verses in Gita. There's a very prescient question that Arjuna asked Sri Krishna. Why do we do these things, commit sinful things, even when we don't want to, as if we're being forced to do it? And Sri Krishna says, yeah, this is all because of these passions. There's rajas. We can add tamas also. There's kama and krodha and other things. That and all go back to this idea of the ego. These are all the reasons why people do it. And the more we're immersed with this, the mind is filled with that, the more or the less control we have over the decisions that we make. This idea of free will, it's not a yes or a no thing. Do we have it or don't we have it? It's a question of degree. The degree to which we're in the grip of anger and jealousy and lust and greed, that's the degree to which we don't have so much free will. When we're free from them, then we can freely decide things based on what we feel is the best thing for ourselves and for others. So he says, you see, sin flies away when love of God grows in a man's heart, even as the water of the reservoir dug in a meadow dries up under the heat of the sun. So we shouldn't think of it as such a big thing, that it can disappear very easily. But one cannot love God if one feels attracted to worldly things, to lust and gold. Merely taking the vow of monastic life will not help a man if he is attached to the world. It is like swallowing your own spittle after spitting it out on the ground. Tutu fele awa tutu kawa. Thakur has this very nice way of expressing this. Tutu. When I first read that word, I thought, what a nice way of expressing it. When we go, huh? When we spit something out, tutu. So Thakur usually, he uses this expression a few different times. It usually, if a monk or somebody takes a vow to renounce something and then they transgress and they go back and enjoy it. So someone who takes monastic vows and then goes back to the world, This is generally the sense in which he used it. But what he's saying is that inner renunciation is the main thing. It's not the external renunciation. If we take the vows, external vows of renunciation, and still we have tremendous attachment and longing for enjoyment, then we won't get the fruits of our renunciation. After a few minutes, the master continued, the members of the Brahmo Samaj do not accept God with form. So they're still in the carriage now, and there aren't any Brahmos there. It's just, well, of course, M had connection before. Both M and Rakal had been members of the Brahmo Samaj, but of course now that they're completely devoted to him. But anyhow, he's talking about that. The members of the Brahmo Samaj do not accept God with form. Narendra says that God with form is a mere idol. Now, I have this feeling that half the time when there's a discussion about God with form, that there's a total miscommunication, that the Brahmos were almost incapable of thinking about God with form in any deeper, higher sense, any sense other than image worship, or idol worship, what they would call. They considered it idolatry. So Thakur's understanding of God with form is very, very subtle. A very beautiful combination of the subjective and the objective, the ocean taking a form of blocks of ice, so many different ways he explains it, dyeing the cloth different colors, that a lot of it is due to the longing of the heart of the devotee, what form God will take. A lot of it has to do with visions of God that we see, or the way that we worship God. Very little of it has to do with image worship. But even then, when the Brahmos would come back and talk about the idol, Sri Ramakrishna would say, but I see it as Chinmaya. I see it as the embodiment of pure consciousness. So even that, and he would tell them, see it as a symbol of God. Don't think of it, nobody's actually worshipping this piece of stone. They're worshipping God through the image. There's a very nice incident that took place in the life of Swamiji. He was traveling, must have been in Gujarat, I think, not quite sure. And he was having a discussion with one of the ministers, the Dewan, and anyhow, one of the places, about image worship. And he couldn't convince him that there was nothing wrong with image worship. Swamiji used to say that how can I criticize worshipping God through the image when my own master, the Sri Ramakrishna, had the highest God realization through that type of worship. Anyhow, he said to him that you see the picture of the Maharaja on the wall, you bring it down. So he brought it down, and he said, now spit on it. He said, how can I spit on it? He said, why can't you? It's just a picture, it's not him. And he said, yes, but when we see that picture, we want to show respect to it and feel that it's him. And Swamiji said, just so with the worship of God through the image, that it brings to mind this idea of God, so we have certain respect for it that way. So Thakur said, the members of the Brahmo Samaj do not accept God with form. Narendra says that God with form is a mere idol. He says further, what? He still goes to the Kali temple, meaning Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna and his party arrived at Balaram's house. He went to Balaram's house, they say 100 different times. I don't know who kept track or anything, but more than any other place in Calcutta. And he went, really, we see so many times he's visiting these devotees' homes in Calcutta. He went to Balaram's house so many times, Ram's house, Surendra's house. He went to M's house on a couple of occasions. I don't think M recorded those times, though, for some reason. Do we have any record of him at his house? But Thakur says to him, I want to go to your house one day. So we assume that he went there. Anyhow, to many of the devotees' homes. And of course, many of the Brahmos. And they had their festivals and things in their homes sometimes. So Sri Ramakrishna and his party arrived at Balaram's house. Jagjanath of Nandan Bagan came to invite the master to his house at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Thakur would go almost anywhere. We don't know much about this Yajnanath. I don't know if his name comes up again, but apparently he was a devoted to Sri Ramakrishna, or had some respect for him, wanted him to come to his house. So he invited him to his house at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Sri Ramakrishna agreed to go if he felt well. After Yajnanath's departure, the master went into an ecstatic mood. He said to the Divine Mother, "Mother, what is all this? Stop. What are these things thou art showing to me? What is it that thou dost reveal to me through Rakal and others? The form is disappearing. But mother, what people call man is only a pillowcase, nothing but a pillowcase. Consciousness is thine alone." Probably Thakur was thinking again about this idea of God with form and God without form. He used to say that God with form is not, it's not something written in stone. It's something that is malleable. Each one of us will see God in a different way. And when he said these blocks of ice form, this will be the form of God through the devotion, the cooling power of our devotion, bhaktihim. But when the sun of knowledge arises, it melts back into the form of this ocean. So Thakur is thinking, now, mother, what is this? You're making everything melt back into the formless. This is a little early. This is only 1883. But Thakur says towards the end, when he got closer to the end, that this formless form of mother started coming to him. And this happened with Ram Prasad also. The songs that he composed at the end of his life were more about this formless aspect. Mother is the infinite absolute reality. And this idea of a pillowcase, this is such a sweet idea that Thakur would see that the real person, that the real self, has nothing to do with this outer garment, just like the pillowcase and the pillow. We come upon this term, and very nice, we may have read it recently, another nice incident. They're talking about Bhavhari Baba, and one of them says, Bhavhari Baba, he keeps your picture in his room where he stays. So Sri Ramakrishna, half in an ecstatic mood again also, he says, just a pillowcase. That what is it to look at this picture? That's not the real self. Now there was another time when Hazra, and who was it? Not Vaishnav Charan. Somebody else. They were going to see a holy man. Sri Ramakrishna, they were Krishna Kishore. He got very mad at Hazra. Haladari that day. That Haladari said, what's the point in going to see just a cage of flesh and bones to see the holy man? So he said, someone whose mind is thinking of God day and night, you're calling just a cage of flesh and bones. So Thakur agreed with that. So it's not that he didn't see that different people are worthy of more respect than others. He did, of course. But sometimes he would go into that mood where he would see just the same Rama dwelling within all the beings, he used to say sometimes. Tumi jano or naye jano, tumi Ram. Whether you know it or not, he would tell the devotees, whether you know it or not, you're Rama. That means the God alone dwells within all of you. The modern Brahmagyanis, that means the Brahmo Samaj, the modern Brahmagyanis have not tasted thy sweet bliss. He's talking to the Divine Mother now in this semi-conscious state. Their eyes look dry, and so do their faces. They won't achieve anything without ecstatic love of God. They say that this was one of the gifts that Thakur gave to the Brahmo Samaj, this idea of this ecstatic love of God. That's why we see that the songs that were composed later, Amai Dema Pagul Kore, Mother Make Me Mad with Thy Love, all of these were after Trailokanath and others came in contact with Sri Ramakrishna. Mother, once I asked thee to give me a companion just like myself. Is that why thou hast given me Rakal? We know that image that Thakur had, and that the Divine Mother said, you see, this is your child. And he said, how can I have a child? And she said, no, a divine child, spiritual child. So that was Rakal, Swami Brahmananda. The master went to Adhar's house, where arrangements were being made for the Kirtan. Many devotees and neighbors had gathered in Adhar's drawing room, anxious to listen to the master's words. Master, to the devotees. Both worldliness and liberation depend on God's will. It is God alone who has kept man in the world in a state of ignorance, and man will be free when God, of his own sweet will, calls him to himself. It is like the mother calling the child at mealtime, when he is out playing. When the time comes for setting a man free, God makes him seek the company of holy men. Further, it is God who makes him restless for spiritual life. Now, we always run into these difficulties when we hear these things. Well, what about karma? Huh? And we were reading the other night, Holy Mother. She was saying, how does God do all of these things? Through his law, through the law of karma. So there's not a real contradiction here that we can understand. Hey, Mark. We can understand that one of the ways that if we say, why will God keep people from wanting to realize him? Why will God do that? If we understand that this law of karma is that divine will. Divine will is that we get what we deserve. As we sow, so we reap. One way of understanding this. Of course, others will say, don't get too technical. Thakur is saying, Divine Mother is doing it, accept the Divine Mother is doing it. But then we have that question. Why will the Divine Mother keep some drowning in worldliness? So we look at the other side of it, where Swamiji will say that nobody to blame but ourselves. We ourselves have dug the hole that we're in, and we ourselves have to get ourselves out. So these are two extremes, these two different explanations, God's will and karma. Some will say everything is karma. Thakur really would say that karma can be lessened a little bit through divine grace, which really means through our own devotion. Of course, Thakur didn't talk about the Divine Mother the way we understand the Divine Mother. For Thakur, she was a living presence and a living being, not just, he says Divine Mother is Brahman together with Shakti, but it was more than that. This was someone who spoke to him. Some divine presence, which is very hard to fathom for most people. Further, it is God who makes him restless for spiritual life. What kind of restlessness, sir? This restlessness, Vakuluta, is usually the term that's used, that Thakur used. He likes that term very much. He used to say that this is the final stage. We want to have a little bit in the beginning, but this grows and grows and grows to the point where it becomes impossible to live without God. When it reaches that point, then we'll have the vision of God. And I don't know who was the first one who did it, but there was someone who coined this term, Vyakulata Yoga. That is a path to God realization through yearning alone. And he took this to be the main teaching of Sri Ramakrishna, adding another yoga to the other yogas. Of course, we need this intensity and this great longing for God, no matter what spiritual path we're on. Master, like the restlessness of a clerk who has lost his job. Now, it doesn't sound like much, huh? Nowadays, people, they lose their job, they collect unemployment. Now we have so many millions of people out of work who aren't looking for jobs, and there are too many jobs that are available. It was different in Thakur's time. If we remember what happened to Narendra, to that type of yearning, where barefoot he went from place to place, fearful that his parents and that his mother and his brothers and sisters would starve to death. That type of longing for a job he's talking about. He makes the round of the offices daily and asks whether there is any vacancy. When that restlessness comes, man longs for God. A fop seated comfortably with one leg over the other, chewing betel leaf and twirling his mustaches. A carefree dandy cannot attain God. Neighbor, can one get this longing for God through frequenting the company of a holy man? So this is the question. If this is the means for God realization, then how do we get it? How do we acquire this longing for God? We can't pretend to have it. Huh? We can't, Thakur says, weep for God. So we say, okay, now I'll weep for God. we can, it has to be genuine. It has to really come on its own. So we wonder, how can it come? So it's a very good question. Can it be done through holy company? And we know how often Thakur talks about holy company. Probably this is the best answer. Yes, the very best answer when we see, yes, we have a glimpse of these God-realized souls. Sometimes I wonder that I had the opportunity to see very briefly some of these great souls, and they leave such a deep impression. I'm reading now the long section about Gopesh Maharaj. You know, I talk very often about this Prachin Sadhudev Kotha, a very beautiful book about these early Swamis of the order. And this Gopesh Maharaj, Swami Sarideshanandaji, who was a disciple of Holy Mother, he was considered to be one of the saintliest of all the monks of our order. And so many of the Swamis I'm reading, so many of these great Swamis who became president of the order later, they would go and sit at his feet. He was so highly respected. I only saw him on 2 different occasions, but even just seeing him for the first time, you just feel this tremendous power there. And you see this the joy and calmness in his face that you think, yeah, wouldn't that be nice if I could get some of that? We remember the story of Buddha when he had his 4 trips outside of the temple garden, and he saw a sick person, he saw an old person, and he saw a dead person. They caused him to have a little bit of this doubt about what is really valuable in life and everything. But the 4th trip, he saw a young monk walking, no possessions, yet full of joy, and that did it. That was enough to say, I want that. I want to become like that. And then he renounced everything. So this is a good question. Can one get this longing for God through frequenting the company of holy men? Master, yes, it is possible, but not for a confirmed scoundrel. So we shouldn't think that everybody who went to see Sri Ramakrishna walked away with tremendous longing for God. Everybody had a different capacity to imbibe, to assimilate that joy and bliss and God Thakur had, that he manifested. Some of them saw Thakur and weren't the least bit interested. It had no effect on them that we know of. Maybe later in life they remembered and something happened, but at least at the time. So it says, not for a confirmed scoundrel. A sannyasi's kamandalu, this water pot, made of bitter gourd, travels with him to the 4 great places of pilgrimage, but still it does not lose its bitterness. The Kirtan began. The musician sang of Sri Krishna's life in Vrindavan. Radha. Kirtan generally means the events in the life of Sri Krishna and Radha, and secondarily the life of Chaitanya Deva and Nityananda and others. Generally, Kirtan is with regard to this Vaishnava tradition. Not that you won't have, you will have these Shama Shangit, you'll have these other groups that come and sing songs about Mother Kali and everything. But generally, Kirtan refers to this. Radha, friend, I am about to die. Give me back my Krishna. Friend, but Radha, the cloud of Krishna was ready to burst into rain. It was yourself who blew it away with the strong wind of your peak. We saw this last time, this man, Abhiman, that this type of spiritual attitude that one has when there's a very intimate, close relationship. You didn't look at me, I won't look at you. Huh? Or the little child. Oh, you won't give me what I want, then I won't talk to you anymore. That type of pique. Obhiman. You were certainly not happy to see Krishna. Oh, this is the friend talking. You were certainly not happy to see Krishna happy. Or why were you piqued? Radha. But this pride was not mine. My pride has gone away with him who made me proud. What was her pride? That she could serve Krishna. It was nothing personal. After the music, Sri Ramakrishna conversed with the devotees. Master. The gopis worshipped Katyayani in order to be united with Sri Krishna. I didn't know exactly if there's any special reference. I asked Swami B. He said Katyayani is just a name of Parvati, name of the Divine Mother. I don't know if there was some special incident or if they actually literally went to a temple that way, but what it means is that they recognized that this Divine Mother, this divine power, has to be propitiated. That it says everyone is under the authority of the Divine Mother, Mahamaya, the primal energy. Yeah, we normally will associate the gopis, of course, as worshippers of Krishna himself, but they were lovers of Krishna. That doesn't mean they couldn't worship the Divine Mother, that they would go to the temple and do all of that. Anyhow, there's probably some story behind this, I don't know. The gopis worshipped Katyayani in order to be united with Sri Krishna. Everyone is under the authority of the Divine Mother, Mahamaya, the primal energy. Now, when Thakur says the primal energy, he doesn't mean just this inert energy or anything. He's talking about the Divine Mother as the ultimate reality. What we would simply say God, the God with the power to create the world and to bestow grace in the world, all of these different things. What Thakur usually says, Brahman and Shakti together will be Mahamaya. This is not Shakti separate from Brahman, but Brahman together with Shakti. So Mahamaya, the primal energy. Even the incarnations of God accept the help of Maya to fulfill their mission on earth. Therefore they worship the primal energy. Accept the help of Maya. Thakur used to say that they have to have a little bit of this Maya within, even to take birth, even to live in the world. There has to be some type of identification with the body, even a little bit of a desire for enjoyment. Thakur used to keep these little things that he would like to enjoy. Otherwise the mind would go up. It would be merged in Brahman. He wouldn't be able to talk to people or do anything. So a little bit of rajas and tamas has to be there, even for the divine incarnations. A little bit of attachment has to be there. How attached Thakur was to Swamiji and Rakala and all of the others, Holy Mother also. Swamiji, we see how when Goodwin died and other tragedies came, how he wept bitterly. They all could weep when their loved ones passed away. But there was no touch of anything personal. There was no ego to it. It was different from, of course, it wasn't real attachment. It was a very pure type of love. So quite different from what we experience usually. So therefore they worship the primal energy. Don't you see how bitterly Rama wept for Sita? Brahman weeps ensnared in the meshes of Maya. Yeah, this is with a little expression that Thakur used to use. Must be from a song. Poncho bhuter fande brahma pade kande. That caught in the snares of the five elements. What is this trap of the five elements? This body. That means they have to become embodied beings if they're going to enact their play and fulfill their mission on earth. So if they do that, if they take a human body, then they have to have a human mind to a certain extent and human emotions to a certain extent, which means that they'll experience ups and downs and they'll even weep at different times. So in many ways, the avatar is like an ordinary human being, but in the most important ways, very, very different. And but they need that. They need to have that in order to live in the world. They need to have these human qualities, and we need to see them with human qualities to be able to relate to them. So in the life of Jesus, when he saw the money changers outside of the temple, we got furious and started kicking them out and overturning tables and things like that. This kind of divine fury, divine anger. We'll see this in the avatars. But there's something holy behind it. And there's nothing personal. We have a little ego behind all of our things, which clouds and colors everything. Vishnu incarnated himself as a sow in order to kill the demon Hiranyaksha. After killing the demon, the sow remained quite happy with her young ones. Forgetting her real nature, she was suckling them very contentedly. The gods in heaven could not persuade Vishnu to relinquish his sow's body and return to the celestial regions. Of course, this is a very strong example of the avatar being completely overcome by Maya. He was absorbed in the happiness in his beast form. After consulting among themselves, the gods sent Shiva to the sow. Shiva asked the sow, "Why have you forgotten yourself?" Vishnu replied through the sow's body, "Why, I am quite happy here." Thereupon, with the stroke of his trident, Shiva destroyed the sow's body, and Vishnu went back to heaven. From Adhar's house, Sri Ramakrishna went to Ram's house. Ramchandra Datta, one of the chief householder disciples of the Master, lived in Calcutta. Now this is before he purchased that property in Kankurgachi, which we know as Jogodan, and had his garden house. This was very common for people who could afford it. For wealthier people in Calcutta, they would have a second place. In those days, these were not rural, but they were kind of, I guess, the equivalent of the suburbs or something. Now it's all part of Kolkata, but in those days they would have a place where there were some grounds and it was quiet. The air was nice. They could have a pretty garden and everything where they could get away. A little vacation house, something like that. So before that, Thakur used to go to his place in Kolkata. Afterwards, of course, he went many times to Kankurgachi also to see him. And Surendra did the same thing. He also had a property within walking distance of Ram. Unless that was in Calcutta. I'm not sure. Anyway. Okay. Because we find it one time, Sri Ramakrishna went walking. He walked from, I don't remember now if it's Kankurgachi or in Kolkata, when they met that sadhu. The Master had visited his house a number of times and unstintingly praised the devotion and generosity of this beloved disciple. We saw last week that he met Ram in 1879, a couple of years before this. So he went on several occasions. A few of the Master's disciples made Ram's house virtually their own dwelling place. And the two that we know especially are Tarak, who became Swami Shivananda, and Nitya Gopal. And I'm sure there were others also. So he was very generous and kept his house open like that. There are many in those days who did that. People were extremely open, and there wasn't, see, in the West, we value our privacy so much, and this idea that relatives will come and stay as long as they want and just move in, and we may have to move to another room. It's very few will actually do that. At least my experience is that those grew up in India, that these are very simple things. Nobody questions it very much. That a relative shows up and they want to stay, then fine. So you fix up a bed and you move and you adjust. I think maybe because of the joint family in the early days that this was more the case. And many times, and Art Kumar knows this, that the house of the teacher, that they'll just, whenever students want to stay there, can just stay there. This, when we read about the life of Swami Premashanandaji, that his father was like that in their house. And I think it was Swami Shivananda's father also, where many students, young people, they would just come and stay there. That I don't know how many they could pack into a single room, but nobody seemed to care. It wasn't this same idea of privacy. It's a very different concept of privacy. I'll tell you an interesting thing. I took a course in Hindi one year. Don't try to speak to me in Hindi because I didn't remember too much of it. But the teacher was trying to explain the difference between tu, tum, and ap. We have the same thing in Bengali, tui, tumi, and apni. And when you say what to what, and somebody was asking, well, how do you refer to your wife? And I forget it, and then somebody said, well, what do you use to talk to her in private? And he thought for a minute and he said, we don't have privacy in India. It's a kind of a different concept. He was a very nice man, a nice teacher. So Ram had arranged a special festival to celebrate the master's visit. The small courtyard was nicely decorated. A katak seated on a raised platform. These kataks, even now you'll find them, they can do these recitations. Sometimes they'll repeat verses from the original text, then they'll do it in Bengali or any other language, and then maybe they'll sing some songs. They'll do a whole, like a one-man drama, jatra. It's very, very nice. And some of our monks, one or two of them, are very good at it. You may remember, some of you, when our Swami, Devan Maharaj, what was his name? I can't remember. He came and he did something like that. He was good at that. He was a very good singer, and someone the life of Rama. What was his name? Do you remember?
Gaurangananda.
No, it was before that. He was a Hindi speaker. The one that Kusum. Yeah, the three brothers. Yeah. Swami Atmajnananda's brother, one of his three brothers. Anyhow, it's very, very nice. And in villages and things, when there was no other type of entertainment, sometimes these kataks would go and do recitations from Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavata, and everything. And everyone would come out, and little children would be there. This is how everybody learned these Puranic stories and other things. So they hired him to come and give a little performance. So a katak seated on a raised platform was reciting from the Bhagavata when the master arrived. Ram greeted him respectfully and seated him near the reader. The disciple was extremely happy. The katak was in the midst of a story of King Harishchandra. The great king, now we're going to get a long section. I hope it won't bore everybody. We're not going to get too much of Thakur's words, but M decided to put all of this in for some reason. The great king, Harishchandra of the Purana, was the embodiment of generosity. No one ever went away from him empty-handed. Now the sage, Vishwamitra, wanting to test the extent of the king's charity, extracted from him a promise to grant any boon that he might ask. Then the sage asked for the gift of the sea-girt world, of which Harishchandra was king. Without the slightest hesitation, the king gave away his kingdom. Then Vishwamitra demanded the auxiliary fee, the little fowl. There's a custom in India. I think it means fowl, that when you give something, even when you buy something, you purchase something, then you have to give it a lick. So you'll see in India, if say you buy rice, and you need a pound of rice, they'll do it so it's exactly the same. So you have a pound. They'll take a little more and throw it on so it goes down. The fowl. So Thakur used to say that when he scolded Yogin, he bought a pan that had a crack in it. And he said, no, you give the money, don't expect him to be a religious person. He's selling his goods, he's trying to make money. You make sure that the thing you buy is in good condition, and ask for a little fowl. And make sure he gives a little extra, a little gift, a little something just to throw in for the sake of auspiciousness for the seller, I don't know, for some reason. So this, I think, is what's meant here. Should I look it up? See. Harishchandra. Anyhow, I'll look it up next time. I don't see it here. So anyhow, I think that's it. That he gave something away, but then he said, no, now you have to give me a little bit more. So then Vishwamitra demanded the auxiliary fee, which alone makes charity valid and meritorious. The Katha continued his recitation. Vishwamitra said to the king, O king, you have given away the entire world, which was your kingdom. It now belongs to me. You cannot claim any place here, but you may live in Benares, which belongs to Shiva. I shall lead you there with your wife, Shebya, and Rohitashva, your son. There you can procure the auxiliary fee that you owe me. The royal family, accompanied by the sage, reached Benares and visited the temple of Shiva. At the very mention of Shiva, the master went into a spiritual mood and repeated the holy name several times indistinctly. The Katha continued. The king could not procure the fee and was compelled to sell Shebya, his royal consort, to a Brahmin. With her went Prince Rohitashva, but since even that was not enough to redeem his pledge to the sage, Harishchandra sold himself to an untouchable who kept a cremation ground. He was ordered to supervise the cremations. One day, while plucking flowers for his Brahmin master, Prince Rohitashva was bitten by a venomous snake, and that very night died. The cruel Brahmin would not leave his bed to help the poor mother cremate the body. The night was dark and stormy. Lightning rent the black clouds. See, these kathas could be very dramatic doing all of this. And everyone is listening with rapt attention. Yeah. The night was dark and stormy. Lightning rent the black clouds. Shebya started for the cremation ground alone, carrying the body of her son in her arms. Smitten with fear and overpowered with grief, the queen filled heaven and earth with her wailing. Arriving at the cremation ground, she did not recognize her husband, who demanded the usual fee for the cremation. Shebya was penniless and wept bitterly at her unending misfortunes. The impenetrable darkness was illumined only by the terrible flames of the cremation pyres. Above her the thunder roared, and before her the uncouth guardian of the cremation ground demanded his fee. She, who had once been queen of the world, sat there with her only child dead and cold on her lap. The devotees burst into tears and loudly lamented this tragic episode of a royal life. And what was the master doing? He was listening to the recital with rapt attention. Teardrops appeared in his eyes, and he wiped them away. The Katha continued. When the queen, wailing bitterly, uttered the name of her husband, Harishchandra at once recognized his wife and son. Then the two wept for the dead prince. Yet, in all these misfortunes, the king never once uttered a word of regret for his charity. Finally, the sage, Vishwamitra, appeared and told them that he had only wanted to put the king's charitable impulses to a crucial test. Then Through his spiritual power, the sage brought the prince back to life and returned to the king his lost kingdom. Sri Ramakrishna asked the Kathak to recite the episode of Uddhava, the friend and devotee of Krishna. They were masters, these people, huh? They had so many things committed to memory and could just at a request, they could go through all of these things. At the request of Krishna, Uddhava had gone to Vrindavan to console the cowherds and the gopis, who were sore at heart because of their separation from their beloved Krishna. So this will be after he went to Mathura. Huh? And the gopis were missing him so much because they didn't have much chance to go there. The first time they went there and saw him dressed up with his turban and his royal garb and everything, they veiled themselves and said, "Who is this stranger?" Huh? They only wanted their Govinda. The Kathak said, when Uddhava arrived at Vrindavan, Uddhava was a dear friend of Sri Krishna, arrived at Vrindavan, the gopis and cowherd boys ran to him eagerly and asked him, "How is our Krishna? Has he forgotten us altogether? Doesn't he even speak our names?" So saying, some of them wept. Others accompanied him to various places in Vrindavan, still filled with Krishna's sweet memory. They said, here it was that Krishna lifted up Mount Govardhan, and here he killed the demon sent by the evil-minded Kamsa. In this meadow he tended his cows. Here on the bank of the Jamuna he sported with the gopis. Here he played with the cowherd boys, and here in these groves he met the gopis secretly. Uddhava said to them, "Why are you so grief-stricken at Krishna's absence? He resides in all beings as their indwelling spirit. He is God himself, and nothing can exist without God." He's Jnani. He's talking to these simple villagers. "But," said the gopis, "we do not understand at all that. We can neither read nor write. We know only our Krishna of Vrindavan, who played with us here in so many ways." Uddhava said, "Krishna is God himself. By meditating on him, man escapes from birth and death in the world and attains liberation." The gopi said, "We do not understand big words like liberation. We want to see Krishna, to see the Krishna of our hearts." The master listened to the story from the Bhagavata with great attention and said at last, "Yes, the gopis were right." Then he sang, "Though I am never loath," these are the words of Krishna himself, "though I am never loath to grant salvation, I hesitate indeed to grant pure love." So this is the idea that this prema is something far greater than mukti. I mentioned on other occasions that there are certain Vaishnava traditions, this Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition especially, but also in the Bhagavata, that talks about this Panchama Purushartha, this fifth goal of life, that prema, that this is higher than mukti. And very often they'll say, we don't want this mukti, we don't want this liberation, we want to be able to worship God. We want to live in the presence of God, not merge in God. Even Thakur used to say, we want to be able to taste sugar and not become sugar. So even the Shakti tradition has that idea. "So though I am never loath to grant salvation, I hesitate indeed to grant pure love. Whoever wins pure love surpasses all. He is adored by men. He triumphs over the three worlds. Listen, Chandravali." This is one of the gopis. "I shall tell you of love. Mukti a man may gain, but rare is bhakti." So the liberation is considered something much lower. And when it says bhakti devotion, it doesn't mean ordinary devotion. This is that highest type of devotion where we become mad with love of God. We care for nothing but God. We have no selfish interest in anything. We only want to serve God. So this is something very rare. "Solely for pure love's sake did I become King Vali's doorkeeper down in the realm in the netherworld." Okay, there's a footnote. An allusion to the story of Vali narrated in the Purana. He was punished by the Lord for his excessive charity and was condemned to rule over the netherworld. But he succeeded in extracting from the Lord the boon that he would be his doorkeeper. Alone in Vrindavan can pure love be found. Its secret none but the gopas and gopis know, the cowherd boys and the milkmaids. For pure love's sake I dwelled in Nanda's house, taking him as my father. I carried his burdens on my head. The master said to the Kathak, the gopis had ecstatic love, unswerving and single-minded devotion to one ideal, the nishtha. Do you know the meaning of devotion that is not loyal to one ideal? It is devotion tinged with intellectual knowledge. It makes one feel. So this Jnana Mishra Bhakti, sometimes Thakur talked about it as something lower, that this pure love is something higher, where we don't even care to know these things. Other times he would say, how can you love God without knowing God? So it depended on the context and the circumstances. Other times it's this Shuddha Bhakti. For him, it didn't mean that there was no jnana involved. It meant there was no selfishness involved. So, do you know the meaning of devotion that is not loyal to one ideal? It is devotion tinged with intellectual knowledge. It makes one feel, Krishna has become all these. He alone is the Supreme Brahman. He is Rama, Shiva, and Shakti. But this element of knowledge is not present in ecstatic love of God, because that intimacy won't be there. Once Hanuman came to Dwaraka and wanted to see Sita and Rama. Krishna said to Rukmini, his queen, you would better assume the form of Sita, otherwise there will be no escape from the hands of a Hanuman. This is our greatest example, probably, of nishtha, this idea of Hanuman. He knew, of course, the same Rama also came as Krishna, was also Narayana, but he wanted to see only that form of Rama. Okay, we'll stop here. We're on page 228. Om Niranjanam Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanukham Bhatudvikraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Brahma Krishnam Shirisa Namama. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.